Welcome to Engineering Success Profile Editions. And today we're speaking to Victoria Barbour-Smith about bridge engineering. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Jamie.
Hi. Can you start by telling us what your route was into engineering?
Yeah, so I, like many young people, had no idea what an engineer was. I thought an engineer was the person who fixed the car when it broke down.
Yeah.
And when I was in year 10, I met a careers advisor who just happened to suggest engineering to me, which was great because they said, well, if you enjoy maths and you enjoy physics, then why don't you look into engineering? And
Yes.
I had no idea, so I went away and did some research, and I decided that I really wanted to be an aerospace engineer because I thought that sounded really cool.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
But I wasn't 100% sure, so I opted to do general engineering at university. So what that means is in my first 2 years, I studied all different types of engineering. So electrical, fluid dynamics, which is sort of like aerospace, mechanics, structures. And then after 2 years, I specialized. By that time, I decided that I really wanted to do civil and structural engineering.
Right, okay.
And so I focused on civil and structural engineering modules for my last 2 years, and graduated with a master's in 2016.
Right, okay. So then how did you become involved in actual bridge engineering?
So I chose civil and structural engineering because I really like the fact that people who have no idea what engineering is still use what we design in their daily lives without even realizing. And so I wanted to work in infrastructure because it's so important to how we live our lives as people. And bridges also structurally just make more sense to me than buildings, which sounds really silly. But when I was working, just sort of looking at bridges and thinking how the forces flow through a bridge makes more sense to me than building. So I thought that was probably the best way to go.
Right. So in your day-to-day work, how long do you spend on site and how long are you in the office, or do you get out on site, or what's the balance?
So I work for a design consulting firm. So my job is majority office-based. I spend a very small proportion of my time on site, only really when projects get to construction stage, so almost past the point where the design is done and they're now building it. We might have some reason to go to site, say if we're invited by the contractor to check something. Occasionally also at the early stages, the project I'm working on at the moment, we are working with some existing structures and doing some surveys to see the condition of those. And so that requires some site attendance. But I've also spent, a year ago, I was seconded to a contractor called Taylor Woodrow. And I spent a year working on a construction site on the M4 motorway with them. So that was to get an idea of how structures like the ones I design in the office get built in real life. And that was a great experience because I think it's really important to understand the reality of the people building the structures. And plus then I get to say that I built a bridge, which is great.
Yeah, that's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what does your role actually entail then?
So I work on the design of infrastructure. It's not just bridges, I should say. It's infrastructure, the structural design of infrastructure. So imagine structural design of things that aren't buildings, essentially. Predominantly bridges, but occasionally things like stations. And what that means is we can work at any stage of a project, from just sort of thinking up the idea of there needs to be a bridge here, what's it going to look like, all the way to detailed design, which is just before you get to construction. I like both ends. I like the challenge of being told that a bridge needs to go here and trying to work out what that's going to look like, and how that fits in with all the other disciplines around it. But also really like the really detailed problem solving of, say, what size is this beam going to be and how many bolts do we need for this connection and where are they going to go and how do we show that on the drawing.
Construction
side.
Yeah. So what sort of projects do you actually work on then? Is it one big project for a few months, or is it different little projects, you know, day to day, week to week?
So it varies. I've worked on a couple of big projects that I've worked on for months. One station that I worked on, which I worked on for a year.
Right.
At the moment, I'm working on a big, sort of large-scale infrastructure project with lots of bridges,
Right.
and I've been working on that for 6 months, and we'll work on that for a while
Okay.
into the future.
Yeah.
But I've also worked on small projects when they come along. So I worked last year on a big, long-span suspension bridge, doing some checks of some of the temporary works,
Right.
and that was really cool because it was really exciting to be involved in one of these big, it will be when it's built, the world's longest span suspension
Oh, really?
bridge.
Okay.
So
Yes.
that's very exciting to have worked on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was just for a few weeks doing some checks on some of the small details for the temporary works.
Right. So what is the most challenging part about being a bridge engineer?
Good question. I think the most challenging part is probably bringing in all the other disciplines that when you start out you don't know that much about. So
Right.
obviously I specialized very heavily in structures when I was at university, and so I don't have much of an awareness of some of the other civil engineering disciplines. Rail, I don't have a huge amount of knowledge in, for
Right.
example.
Yeah.
And at the moment, what the project I'm working on is very multidisciplinary, and so there's a lot of learning to be done to understand what the key drivers are for all the other disciplines, and it's very
Yeah.
interesting, but it requires good communication skills, which I think is key to any engineering job.
Yes. Yeah.
To be able to talk to all the people involved and understand where they're coming from, and
Yes.
know that it's not just the structures that drives the design in the end.
Yeah. So they're the challenges. What's the most rewarding part of your job?
When it's built and you can go and see it.
And say you did this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe so. Unfortunately, I had to leave the M4 project and my secondment before the bridge I was working on was finished.
Right.
So I did the foundations,
Yes.
which I think is very important. But my understanding is that when they finished the structure, they engraved our names on a piece of concrete. No one
Oh,
will be
really?
able to see it,
Okay.
but it's
Yes.
there in the bridge.
Right.
So that's quite cool, knowing that my
Yeah.
name's.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I was looking to work as a bridge engineer, what companies should I look out for, or should I look for a structural engineering company, or you know, what would you suggest?
That's a very good question, because I think it depends on the individual. Some companies, if you are a structural engineer, you'll do both bridges and buildings.
Yeah.
Some you will specialize in one or the other. So at Arup, where I work, the bridge team is separate from the buildings team.
Right.
And I do know that most people have a preference for one or the other.
Right.
So they have chosen to go to the buildings team because they want to
Yeah.
work on buildings,
Yeah.
bridges because they want to work on bridges. So then if you're trying, then you have to decide whether you want to design or build bridges.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Both are good fun. Or there are also companies where you can do the sort of technical designing the bridge beams, say if you're building steel beams,
Yeah.
and then also installing them. So I worked on site with a company called Cleveland Bridge, who build some big steel beams and then deliver them to site and install them.
Right.
So that's one other option. So in terms of the design, Arup's a great company. I'm currently working with people from a company called Tony G, which is a bit smaller, but they do really technical, tricky bridges.
Yes.
So they have a lot of good structural experience. And then the people who designed the bridge I worked on when I was on site, Arcadis and Jacobs, they are also good places to do bridge engineering.
Yeah.
And then the companies that the joint venture that I was working as part of on site who were building these bridges was Taylor Woodrow and Balfour Beatty. So
Right.
if you want to build bridges, and at the moment I'm working with BAM
Yes.
on
Yeah.
construction of bridges also. So lots of companies to go and look for.
Yeah. So just aside from that, do you prefer being on site or in the office? Or do you like a bit of both?
I like doing both.
Right.
I love the technical challenges associated with the problem solving in the office.
Yes.
And I feel like that is why I wanted to become an engineer.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be faced with sort of a blank sheet of paper and end up with a bridge. So that's what I love about the design side.
Yeah.
But it is so satisfying working on site, and at the end of the day, something's been built.
Yeah. So for like graduates and people thinking about getting into engineering, do you think it's actually worth approaching companies and expressing an interest, or do you think you should wait for like careers fairs or things like that?
I would say, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but I would say go for it. I got my first summer placement with Arup through emailing. When I was at university, we had a really good database of contacts at lots of different companies.
Yeah.
So I emailed someone in the Arup Edinburgh office for a summer placement. My grandparents live in Edinburgh.
Right.
So I was going to stay with them and do an internship. And
okay.
They got fewer applications in the Edinburgh office for internships than in some of the other offices, so it was a bit easier to get that placement. And so I got that placement, and then I've since got a job working for Arup in London, and I've since then moved to Leeds. But I know there are application processes for internships. Sometimes students might find that they're not in the right year, so they don't fit into the right age category.
Right.
So I would say it's always worth, if you can find a contact detail, getting in contact with someone in the company and seeing if there's any other options, whether it's just a shorter time to get some experience or some work shadowing, particularly for younger students.
Yeah. Do you think it's worth students actually sorting out like a LinkedIn profile and linking in with people at companies?
Yeah, I do, because LinkedIn is a great way to not only connect with people, but to build your own profile so that people can quickly see what experience you have, a bit quicker than sort of reading a CV and cover letter. People just click on the link and then they know everything you want them to know about you professionally. And I accept most LinkedIn connection invites, particularly so on the Women's Engineering Society's early career board. And through that role, I meet a lot of students who are interested in knowing more about life in the real world of engineering. And so LinkedIn's a really good way for me to be able to connect with them and sort of share my experience.
Yeah. So what routes are there into bridge engineering, or let's say structural engineering? Would you have to go in as a graduate? Are there apprenticeships, or are both sort of like the same value?
There are apprenticeships and graduate schemes. I think I obviously went through the graduate scheme, but I work with apprentices, I work with former apprentices. And I'm working towards being a chartered civil engineer, and that is something that you can do as a graduate or as an apprentice. I think that it really boils down to what is better suited to the individual. I really enjoyed my time at university, but I can also see that the apprentices that I'm working with are gaining. It's a huge advantage having that real life, experience in the engineering world. And not only are you right from the get-go sort of getting that experience, but you're also making contacts and building a network from a much earlier age, which I think is a real advantage later on.
So what advice would you give a future bridge engineer?
Oh, well, it sounds silly, but just give everything a try. So I was really sure I wanted to be a designer, and I love working in design, but I also really enjoyed my time on site. So I would say that people shouldn't rule out either one, and give both a try and see what is actually better suited to you. I worked with a summer intern whilst I was on site who I actually helped to get a summer placement with Arup this year, because we chatted a lot about the differences that I'd seen, and she sort of saw that she should have a look and see which one she preferred.
Yeah.
And so I'm really glad that she's able to get that, so she can make her own mind up rather than just hearing what I had to say.
Yeah. And finally, have you got any interview tips for young people? Obviously, it's quite nerve-wracking going for interviews, and we spoke earlier that we do mock interviews, but there's nothing that really compares to actually going to an interview. Have you got any tips for young people?
Yeah, a few. Firstly, do a little bit of research. Make sure you understand why you want to work for the company. I know it's really hard when you're sitting in your final year at university and you're applying to so many places because you just really want to have a job. But you have to find, for each application, for each company, you have to find something that is your reason for wanting to apply to that company. And you have to drill into that and make sure that you have that conviction. And secondly, make sure you can draw basic bending moment diagrams.
Right, okay. Do you get asked to draw one quite a lot in interviews?
Yes.
All right, okay.
I have noticed.
That's an extremely good tip to have then.
Yep.
Yeah, be prepared.
Yeah.
Victoria, that's it. Thank you so much for your time today.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you, great to hear from you.
And you.